If you toss Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, the combatants, into a single block, and for economic purposes in a war, that's usually the best way to think about it, everything in that first column, the three of them together, the world's largest supplier. It's number 2 for the second column, and so on. Now, I am going to be in Langley in a couple of weeks, and we are only talking about this slide, 4 hours. I just want to hit some of the highlights here real quick. First, the world's number 5 wheat exporter. Now, just as we took lessons from the Kiev assault, so did the Russians. The Russian lesson was that, okay, these people are not wayward Russians. We maybe shouldn't have believed our own propaganda. They are not going to welcome us in with gifts of flowers, which means that they should all die. So we're going to do what we do best. We're going to advance slowly under a hail of artillery, and we're going to specifically target every piece of civilian infrastructure that we see with a double emphasis on anything involving agriculture. The goal is to make the land uninhabitable and make sure that no one is able to feed themselves in the areas that we conquer. That way, the population will self-segregate. Group 1 will run. They will become refugees. We never have to worry about them again. Group 2, the ones who stay, are clearly combatants, and we can shoot them on sight. So they advance slowly. In 2 months, they used 2.5 million artillery shells, and then they brought in the Wagner Group and the Chechens to do cleansing operations. From just the areas that are liberated to this point, we know that civilian casualties have been at least 250,000 in this war so far. We estimate that Mariupol alone, which hasn't been liberated, so we're not sure, lost another 100,000 people. The low-end estimate for the number of people that the Russians have forcibly deported to Siberia is also 250,000, mostly children. This is the most systematic genocide humanity has ever seen. This is worse than the Holocaust on the numbers and the timescale. And Russia has made sure that Ukraine will probably never be a food exporter again. We're only at the beginning of seeing the impact of this on a global scale. And as much as this bothers me, this is even worse because this is the source, the single largest source of fertilizer in the world. Now, that hasn't been crushed yet, but now that there is suspicion that in the last 48 hours, the Russians have started deliberately destroying their own infrastructure just to spite Europe. You may have heard about the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. We don't know who did that yet. If it was the Russians, you should count on everything on this list going to zero. 40% of the world's potash fertilizer comes from Belarus. The macroeconomic conditions we're looking at this moment have a long road ahead of them. Because on the other side of this, there won't be a European or Chinese economy for demographic reasons. And the opportunities therein are massive for agriculture. This is where the word's phosphate comes from. It comes from the blue, it goes to the red. Now, you guys all... Those of you who are in the ag sector live in a degree of fear of African swine fever for good reason. But consider the process that you go through. You test your hogs, you send the test kit off to a lab, they call you with the results. Pretty simple 3-step process. Not in China. In China, you test the hogs, you send it off to a lab. The lab sends the results to the Chinese Communist Party. And then the CCP calls you to tell you what the results were. And so there hasn't been a single case of African swine fever in China for 3 years. More likely, they're on the verge of another significant outbreak the last time they had to cull 2/3 of their entire herd. They know that they are going to be facing a food crisis on top of everything else in the not-too-distant future. Now, in a Chinese world where pork is no longer available at scale, your only remaining crop that you can actually control is rice. And rice is the world's most phosphate-hungry product. And so China has always been the world's largest producer and exporter of phosphate. But 1.5 years, they stopped exporting. They're still down by like 85%, and it's never coming back, folks. So we lost potash because of the Russians. We're losing nitrogen because of the energy crisis. And we're losing phosphate because of the Chinese. And none of these can be fixed on anything less than a multi-year time frame. And most places don't even have a backup. On the left, you're looking at row crop. On the right, you're looking at where the cattle are. And you'll notice they don't quite line up in most places. This is a feature of globalization. When the world became a single economic space, we all specialized. And so as a rule, we removed animal protein production from where the crops were because we needed that land to grow more value-added products. So for the most part, beef left the Midwest and went to the Great Plains.
So the poo, the natural fertilizer, is no longer where we physically need it. Some version of this has happened on a global scale.
Skywalker and lightsabers, but Reagan, right? Okay. 1983, the summit in Reykjavik. Gorbachev and Reagan almost did away with nuclear weapons completely. But at the last second, Gorbachev was like, this is all great, glad we have a deal, but there's just one sticking point. You have to get rid of this Star Wars program. Because if we're going to get rid of 95% of our weapons, but you have a missile shield, that's just not fair. And Reagan's like, well, yeah, that's the whole idea. It's not supposed to be fair. And he walked out. Very Reagan. So Gorbachev goes home a little dejected and convinced that space lasers are the future of great power competition. And he builds out the supply chain that's necessary to support them. Now, the Soviet system obviously disintegrated before any of that could be launched, but the stuff on the ground was built.
Back in 2014, a narrative took hold. What we're looking at here is total investment from into all gas from all government and all private. In 2014, a narrative took hold that we're done with fossil fuels for financial reasons. The idea was that if by 2040 we need to be at net zero, then why in the world would you put your money into a project? Because it takes 3 to 8 years for a project to break even and another 5 to 15 to get payback. That's already beyond 2040. So in that sort of situation, your money would be wasted. You'll never get paid back. And we got something called ESG for financial reasons. Luckily, what is true for the average? How far over am I already? I see a lot of people checking watches. There we go. This is really important. In an investment environment where prices suddenly matter, you've got to look at where the production can come from at a reasonable price. So we're looking here at what I call the checkbook map of the upper Midwest. I think you all know where you are. I think you all also know that this is the most important city in the history of human civilization. Marshalltown, Iowa, where I am from. Here is Bismarck, North Dakota. Should you ever find yourself in Bismarck, you're going to have to ask yourself, how the hell did that happen? And this is not a frat party. It's lit up because of a problem with transport. Oil's a liquid. It conforms to the shape of the container. So you can put into a rail car, tanker truck, doesn't matter. But natural gas disperses. It's gas. You have to capture it with a gathering system that connects to a transport system, that connects to a distribution system, that connects to a usage system, and it has to all flow at roughly the same rate because storage is very difficult. Now, here in the U.S., we have the world's largest and most redundant natural gas distribution system, but we can't keep up with what is bubbling up out of shale oil wells as a byproduct. And so we have to flare it until we can build out the infrastructure. And you can see that from space. And it's the same in Texas. Now, that means that in the United States, and only in the United States, we price natural gas as a waste product. And that has changed a whole lot of things. So this is the Henry Hub Center in Oklahoma, where it's our primary natural gas pricing location. For those of you who have spent any time on the Gulf Coast, you will recognize these spots as hurricanes, because this used to be where we got most of our natural gas. So a storm would come through, we'd have to shut everything down and spend months repairing the damage. Until 2009. Because in 2009, the bulk of the natural gas consumed in North America was sourced from a shale field. And it was primarily waste product. And so we got 12 years of low, cheap prices. You know what this is. This is what happened last January when Texas got cold. It got down to 25. And everything broke. Natural gas, oil, coal, nuclear, wind. So they managed to have everything break at the same time. And then this is what we're all bitching about right now. In September, we hit $9, which felt high until you look at it in inflation index terms, in which case $9 is exactly the 50-year average. We are bitching about average energy prices. And this is what the Chinese and Europeans are doing.
Part of that is neon. Now, neon is a little atypical for an industrial material. Stage one is a byproduct of steel manufacture. You have an air separation unit that pulls out nitrogen and oxygen, which you then blow into the steel furnace in order to get the composition you want. And everything else goes into a third canister, which is sent to another facility that's more sophisticated for separation and purification. You pull out the helium and the argon and the carbon dioxide and the neon. The first phase, air separation units, are done at steel facilities in southern Russia, which are under sanctions and are shutting down. The second phase, purification, is done either in Odessa in Ukraine, which hasn't had power in 4 months, or Mariupol, where the facilities are gone. That is 80% of global neon. Today we use neon not for giant space lasers, but for the etching lasers that are in semiconductor fabrication facilities. It gets a little worse. The remaining 20% all comes from China. Now, not all semiconductors are created equal. There's 3 kinds. Number 1, you've got the high-end stuff that is in your phone or your laptop or a server. Those are almost exclusively Taiwan, Korea, Japan, the United States. By value, that's like 3/4 of the total. The ones in the middle, aerospace, power regulation, automotive, that's Thailand, that's Malaysia. The low end, the Internet of Things, the margarita machine that chimes your phone when the slush is just right, that's from China. The smart light bulbs, that's from China. The smart whisk, that's China. So we've got one country that makes the low end, that has the neon, and everyone else who doesn't. We don't just need Russia back. We don't just need Ukraine back. We don't just need Russia and Ukraine working together again. We need to be able to jump in a time machine and go back before the war because the infrastructure is gone. In the meantime, that means we all, at some point in the next 12 months, have to figure out how to work without semiconductors. The only ones that we're going to be able to make reliably are the low-end ones. Okay, let's talk energy. Single biggest issue is going to be with oil. This is a pipeline map. The green are the oil pipelines, and these are the 2 export points that matter the most.